Hi, I'm Dr. Nate Bosch from the Lilly Center for Lakes and Streams. One of the questions that we get a lot about using our local lakes is boats, and how do boats influence the ecology of our lakes? Some people will remember seeing a boat maybe going through a shallow area on their lake and seeing behind it all the sediment, kind of the sediment plume that's stirred up with that propeller moving through that shallow water and taking sediment which was on the bottom now up into the water column. And so to answer those questions, we developed a research project, got together some funding and some partners. A local boat marina helped us out with all the equipment that we needed. And we studied just that. We took 5 different types of watercraft, the most common watercraft throughout northern Indiana here and would be common throughout the Midwestern United States and probably around the world. We looked at personal watercraft like a jet ski or Sea-Doo. We looked at a pontoon boat, a standard pontoon boat where people like to putz around the lake in. We looked at an inboard, outboard sort of cruiser type boat that people might use for skiing. We looked at a strictly inboard boat, a more of a typical ski boat, and then we looked at the increasing popularity of wake surfing boats. That was our 5th one, fully loaded with the ballast so that it sits low in the water and creates the biggest wake. We then took those 5 different types of boats and we ran them at different speeds. We ran them at idle speed to simulate someone just moving slowly from their pier or coming back again, or maybe through a channel. We also ran them at near plane, where they're sort of plowing water, and then we ran them up at on plane, where they're actually skimming across the surface of the water. We ran those boats on 3 different bottom substrate types. Muck, which would be a really black, easily suspended sediment on the bottom. Sand, which probably most people are familiar with along a sandy shore, maybe of a lake or an ocean. And then marl, which maybe you're not as familiar with. This is a limestone sediment type that's produced by algae. As they're doing photosynthesis and changing the pH of the water, it actually precipitates little bits of limestone on the bottom, which is kind of a white and also easily suspended sediment on the bottom of our lakes. So we took 5 types, 3 different speeds, 3 different types of bottom substrate. We also looked at several depths of water. We looked at 3 feet of water depth, we looked at 5 feet of water depth, 10 feet of water depth, and 15 feet of water depth. And when you start adding up all those combinations, we took lots and lots of samples, and we had boats running lots and lots of different directions throughout. We did it on Lake Wawasee, which is our largest natural lake in Indiana. So we had lots of places around the lake where we could run these different tests and not negatively influence one test from another. And what we found was that at 10 feet water depth, that was the minimum water depth where we didn't see any resuspension of sediment on the bottom, no matter how fast the boat was going, no matter what type of sediment was on the bottom, or what type of watercraft was going across the surface. We had drones, we had boats with samples, we had underwater photography. We did it up really big to be able to come with a recommendation of, if you're going to make a wake from a watercraft, any of those 5 types, you want to stay in at least 10 feet of water. And then we know for sure that you won't be stirring up the bottom and you won't be bringing that sediment back up into suspension. So you might wonder, well, why does it even matter if we bring the mud that was on the bottom back up into the water column? The reason for that is as that sediment comes back up into the water column, it's bringing with it a lot of nutrients. And we tested that as well in our research. We looked at what nutrient levels were brought up into the water when that bottom sediment got stirred up. And particularly, we're interested in nitrogen and phosphorus. Those can cause a lot of excess weed growth, also known as aquatic macrophytes, around our lakes and in our streams, as well as algae, different types of algae, including blue-green algae, which can produce toxins which can be harmful to people and their pets. And so we don't want to see that bottom sediment move back up into the water column because of the negative consequences that it leads to. I've got a little model here on the counter next to me. Those of you who are listening to this podcast might want to switch over and watch it on YouTube for this part of it, because I'm going to show how this resuspension of bottom sediment actually happens. So I've got a jar here on this lab benchtop. I've got a little coffee stirrer here as well, which will simulate a boat propeller. And so we have sediment down here, collected from one of our local lakes in a jar with water over the top of it. As we look at it, even before I start to stir it up, we can see how the different particle sizes of sediment fall out at different rates. We've got some of the coarser particles, more of the sands down below, and then we have more of a mucky layer on the top. And that's typically how our lakes are as well. When left alone and allowed to settle, that sediment is going to sort itself as it's coming down, with the heavier particles like sand and gravel falling first, and then the lighter particles like the marl and the muck are going to fall on top of it. Unfortunately, then the muck and the marl, which is most easily suspended, is right at the top, which is where wave action or boat propellers can resuspend it. So I'm putting my stirrer down in here, and I'm just going to turn it on just for a moment. And you can see immediately there that we get a stirring up, especially of that muck. Most of the gravelly sand down below, that didn't stir up as much. Maybe if I put my propeller a little further down into that, we can get some of that to go up as well. And it does, but immediately it falls right back down to the bottom, whereas these more finer particles of sediment, like the muck, continues to move around in the lake. I can see that it's starting to fall out slowly right along the surface here. We've got a little bit of lighter color water where it's already starting to clear out. But as this sediment is in the water column, it's interacting with algae, it's interacting with weeds, and those nutrients that are now up in the water column are feeding those weeds and algae and causing them to grow more. And so we don't want to see that in our lakes. We want to see this sediment stay down at the bottom. If you want to learn more about that research study that I was talking to, you can go to our website, lakes.grace.edu. We have the full report of that research study, just like we have for all of our research projects that we do. There's also a fact sheet on there if you want a little bit more of a concise version of what we found. And the basic recommendation, I'll mention that again for you all. We want to see any watercraft on our lakes that are producing a wake to stay in at least 10 feet of water, so that we don't stir up the bottom sediment and don't lead to more weeds and algae growing in our lakes.